Now, this paper concentrates on the play Fatum Vortigerni from 1619 by the English Jesuit Thomas Compton Carleton, who lived from 1592 to 1666. Now, although relatively faithful to Geoffrey of Monmouth's version of the story of the evil English king, Vortigern, what the author adds to the story is of great interest, especially to his Catholic audience, as he makes a clear analogy to the topic of Henry VIII's great matter through the introduction of two female characters of the play. The divorce of Henry VIII is evidently alluded to, as is the martyrdom of Bishop John Fisher, and it's clear that it was a topic which was popular among Jesuit writers at the time. Jesuit writers of drama. Other anonymous Jesuit tragedies, such as Rofensis and Thomas Morus, 1612, were produced at the English College at Rome and also borrow the same historical base. Sonia Filitz highlights the need to further investigate early modern religious, cultural, and theatrical discourses from a European perspective. And considering the enormous quantity of Jesuit theatre produced, I can only agree with her. I will begin by offering an explanation about Jesuit theatre in general and aim to study the play in question, concentrating on how the historical figures are presented and debating how and whether the concepts of Jesuit, Catholic, and Spaniard could be linked. So, how did these three terms come to be linked? As we all know, Henry VIII's excommunication from the Church of Rome planted the first real seed of controversy regarding the treatment of the Catholic faith, its martyrs, and Spain by the English in the early modern period. This seed was watered and nurtured with a spread of abundant anti-Catholic and anti-Spanish propaganda, especially after the reign of Mary I, Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon's Catholic daughter. Fuel was added to the fire with the attempted invasion of the Spanish Armada in 1588 and the gunpowder plot of 1605. Yet by 1624, the terms Catholic and Spain were not the only ones to appear constantly together in propagandistic works. The term Jesuit completed the trio, and as I proved in my monograph, The Spanish Match and the Literary Image of Spain and the Spaniards in English Pamphlets, propagandistic pamphlets of the first quarter of the 17th century reflect that the terms Jesuit, Catholic, and Spaniard came to be synonymous and were used indiscriminately as insults or even swear words by Protestants of the age. Nonetheless, not all English Catholics nor all Spanish Catholics were Jesuits. So how had this phenomenon come about? I believe this had a lot to do with the educational role of the Society of Jesus in Europe, and in particular their use of drama to spread their word. From the beginning of the English Jesuit mission in 1580, Jesuits had worked hard and fast to attempt to establish a base in the now Protestant country, which was finally made a Jesuit province in 1623. But English Catholics seeking an education denied them in their own country now looked to Europe and to the growing English Jesuit colleges of English exiles on the continent. Indeed, the spread of English Jesuit colleges in Europe is of great interest, as through their teachings they started to become, and I quote, cultural mediators in early modern Europe, an expression coined by Sonia Filitz. Indeed, English Jesuits travelled in Europe and were educated there. They founded bases in Louvain and Rheims, and schools, seminaries, and colleges. The English colleges in Douai, Rome, Lisbon, Liège, and Spain, in Valladolid and Seville and Madrid, trained hundreds of young men as missionaries. Let us look now briefly at how Jesuit theatre evolved from these colleges. The Radio Atque Institutio Studiorum, simplified to Radio Studiorum, drew up the educational policies and ideas of Jesuit schooling in 1586 in Rome, helping to unify the education given in all the colleges in different parts of the world. William McCabe highlights its defense of Christian humanism, as humanism meant culture and allowed the Jesuits to excel in Latin eloquence, which was the cultural ideal not merely of Loyola's men, but of 16th century educators in general. It consisted of being familiar with and at ease in the employment of classical Latin in both prose and verse, which the Ratio Studiorum helped the Jesuits achieve. The first Ratio Studiorum, published in 1586, stated, and I quote, "We recommend that comedies and tragedies should be performed, with the moderation, however, prescribed in the Provincial Rule 58. In the reedition of the Ratio in 1591, in the Provincial's Rule 84, it states, and I quote, "The public distribution of prizes is to be held annually, and plays are not to be neglected, for poetry perishes when drama disappears. No women are to be admitted as spectators, nor may female dress be used on the stage. At least, if it cannot be avoided, let it be decorous and dignified." The final edition of the Ratio of 1599 includes the following rector's rule. Tragedies and comedies must be in Latin, and they must be very few. Their subjects should be religious and edifying, and there should be no interludes that are not in Latin and in good taste. No female characters or costumes may be used. Hence, at the start of the 17th century, the theatre had its place in the Jesuit colleges, with the blessing of the superiors of the order in Rome. What was the purpose of the Jesuit theatre then? It has already been stated that it was a way of achieving Latin eloquence. In fact, how could theatre in Latin not contribute to this? Apart from that, it also helped train would-be Jesuits for their role of proselytizing. It taught the boys all they had to know about how to appear advantageously before an audience, which for a Jesuit educator wishing to influence the world at large and provide it with Christian leaders was of paramount importance. Their resulting eloquence would serve them as good preachers, senators, secretaries, nuncios, ambassadors, indeed in any walk of life. The didactic purpose of the moralities of the miracle and mystery plays is also reflected in this theatre. Jesuit playwrights would attack heresy and its consequences, but generally abstained from odious methods of conducting opposition. Indeed, the English colleges on the continent, though in exile due to the Reformation in their country, do not in their majority seem to show bitterness about this on stage. Humanism served the Jesuits in their pursuit of both culture and religion. The early Portuguese dramatist Luís da Cruz wrote that their tragedies and comedies served to, and I quote, "arouse the interest of students, to maintain the prestige of our school, and to entertain, as well as encourage piety and good morals, and help procure the welfare of the nation together with other means." William McCabe emphasizes that Jesuit plays fall into two distinct categories. The first is the martyr play, and the other consists of history plays set during the late Roman Empire after Constantine's adoption of Christianity, the Byzantine Empire, or in various periods of English history. Fatum Vortigerni falls into the second category, an English history play, but also contains elements of the martyr play. The English College at Douai, where it was written by Thomas Compton Carleton and performed in 1619, was, I quote, "the chief Anglo-Catholic educational centre on the continent." Douai was part of the Spanish Low Countries, although today it is in the north of France, close to the Belgian border. Hence, it was on Spanish territory, and it was Philip II of Spain who established the university there around 1561. The English College at Douai had been founded around 1568 by William Allen, who intended it to be a seminary for Catholic English priests. It is known that Philip II of Spain funded the English College with 2,000 ducats a year. Thomas Compton Carleton was an English Jesuit playwright and philosopher and taught at Douai from 1619 until 1623. He produced 3 plays during that period. Fatum Vortigerni in 1619 was the first, and the next 2, Emma Angliae Regina ac mater hardi canuti regis and Enricus Octavus in 1623 are sadly lost. Let us begin first by trying to scratch on the surface of this research with Thomas Compton Carleton's Jesuit play Fatum Vortigerni. First, it's important to reiterate that this play was written and performed on Spanish territory in Hawaii, which was not an exclusively Jesuit institution and which thus allowed for certain liberties to be taken, such as its introduction of the 2 female characters on the stage, and maybe a third in the character of Death. The storyline is based on the malevolent English king Vortigern, and Compton Carleton seems to follow the story narrated in Geoffrey of Monmouth's narration of this historical episode of Britain's history in his History of the Kings of Britain, books 6 and 7. He leaves out all supernatural elements, such as the use of black magic, evidently because it was a Catholic play. Interestingly, Thomas Middleton, around the same time, 1615 to 1620, wrote the play Hengist, King of Kent, which uses the same historical subject matter, although it appears that this playwright based his work more on the more recent Tudor historical chronicles. But let us not stray from the Jesuit play in question. Let us see what the play is about. The play opens with the character of Death, who introduces the work. Vortigern then appears and in a soliloquy reveals he has killed King Constantine. He resolves to help King Constantine's son, the pious monk Constans, to ascend to the throne so that, I quote, the hand that puts him in power will put him in his tomb. In Act 1, Scene 1. Constans renounces his monkhood to become king, which is lamented by the abbot of Winchester. Vortigern teams with the Pictish lords Tyrestes, Faustus, and Manlius. He wins their favor by telling them that it is thanks to him that Constans now looks favorably on the Scots. When they kill Constans, they tell Vortigern that they have committed this murder for his sake. But Vortigern refuses to acknowledge this and accuses the Picts of the new assassination. Vortigern becomes king and Constance's younger brothers flee England. Having made an enemy of the Picts, Vortigern, now king, teams with the Saxon generals Hengist and Horsa, promising them land and possessions if they help fight and defeat the Picts. Now here I introduce a break in this summary, as from here, thanks to the female characters introduced, one fictional and the other historical, the analogy intended becomes clear. Vortigern, the tyrant king, suddenly bears many similarities to Henry VIII. The audience witnesses a scene where the newly crowned King Vortigern speaks to his wife, who is not named in any way, but in the script is presented as Vortigern's wife. In Monmouth's original historical account, Vortigern's wife does not appear at all, so we can safely say this is a fictional character. However, it becomes clear that this fictional character is based on the historical figure of Catherine of Aragon, thus making her tyrant husband symbolize Henry VIII. The image of this Spanish queen is significant, as in Act 2, Scene 3, she's presented as a good, loving wife, supportive of her husband, who, when witnessing her husband kill the messenger bringing news that the Picts are approaching with their enemy, she cries, "Pray forgive and bless my husband, God, lest he chance to be defeated by his own sinfulness. I shall go to church and innocently pour forth prayers for the guilty man." 3 scenes later, we find Vortigern talking to the Saxon brothers Hengist and Horsa, and Hengist introduces his daughter Ronixa to the king. The latter appoints Hengist as the leader of the English soldiers and adds, "Meanwhile, Ronixa will adorn my home." 2 scenes later, in Act 2, Scene 8, Vortigern's wife in a soliloquy complains, and I quote, "Is a foreign woman insolently seeking another woman's bed, my bed? He cannot do these things, if any sense of shame or spark of virtue shines in her mind." Indeed, here not Vortigern, but Ronixa, evidently symbolizing Anne Boleyn, is presented as the culprit due to her shamelessness and lack of virtue. Yet the subject of how a woman is portrayed by the Jesuits, something which was not at all common, as we know that in Jesuit colleges this was disallowed, is revealed. Suddenly, this good, pious wife has become the woman scorned and abandoned by her husband for another younger woman, and states, "What if he proves to be a guilty Jason, captivated by the woman's wiles? Let him be a Jason. Being a woman, I'll devise a crime worthy of his wife. If there is some foul deed still uninvented and unfamiliar, horrible, impious, by my doing I'll ensure that it is performed. If he should do these things, as a woman, I'll ready my avenging hand and confront crime with equal crime. We have a vengeful wife, willing to commit a crime, not quite the image we have of Catherine of Aragon. Perhaps it is for this reason that the playwright preferred to leave her nameless. Perhaps in order to present a symbolic character, but one that could not be identified with the Spanish monarch. Who knows? Vortigern and Ronix's relationship is evidently based on lust, and what she indirectly refers to as an evil love. In their exchange, after Vortigern's wife has been abandoned, Vortigern says, and I quote, "The people will first learn to obey me thanks to my wife's death," thus showing the colours of a true tyrant. Is he plotting her death? Their exchange is significant. As you can see, by what right do you abandon your wife? By this same right I have exercised. By piety, by crime. It's criminal to oppress a queen. Okay, my lust forbids, lust does more when something is loved amiss or where evil love rules. Bishop Wodenus, evidently analogous to Bishop John Fisher, reacts to the king's new relationship, which he calls unclean love. In Act 2, Scene 11, he's goaded on by the Abbot of Winchester, who incites the bishop to confront the king. Wodenus laments, and I quote, "When the king makes trouble for the nation, salvation is not assured. When his mind is corrupted, threats have no power against it." During Wodenus's and the king's confrontation, the bishop accuses Vortigern. "Burning with unclean ardour, you have taken Hengist's daughter, in a tainted marriage. Here I pass over his daughter's marriage bed, violated by your sin. You have married a pagan. Here I take a firm stand. By what faith, pray, is it permissible to insist on this?" And the dialogue following is self-explanatory. "What law bids me preserve my marriage? God's law. Royal law forbids it, an impious law. It belongs to the government, a wicked law, etc., etc. Nonetheless, law must be approved." It's somewhere in the middle. I don't know if you can see it very well. But at the end, let's go to the end. It says, "What right can you do this?" And Vortigern said, "It is permissible because a king can do as he pleases." In scene 19 of the same act, Wodenus excommunicates Vortigern for being wholly unworthy of the name of a Christian. The dialogue appears in quick snatches once more. A subject should have respect for his king, rather than a pious king should fear his God. And at the end we see Wodenus say, "See that you don't acknowledge him too late." Here he warns him. "And so what piety cannot accomplish will be done by severity. Thus I'm obliged to act, Vortigern. And so, deeming you wholly unworthy of the name of a Christian, on behalf of our supreme God and also the apostolic power conferred on me, I excommunicate you." Wodenus sees that all is lost and continues with his diatribe. "Our pagan guest has brought much adversity for our nation, our people and our king, but his paganism has brought more, and perhaps his posterity, destined to replace the sacred royal line and afire with heresy and wantonness, will provide our realm with upheavals." This prompts Hengist to kill Wodenus, in which the king replies, "Well done and abundantly." Then we see Vortigern's wife alone in scene 22 complaining, "A foreign whore has taken my place." She admits to being in a state of torment. Her torment seems to revolve around the idea that while I am living, will he foul my bed with bastard offspring? Before that, this hand will deprive itself of the breath of life. Thus it will be, and it will be so now. My death will be my supreme revenge. The troubled love trio is made clear in the next act, where the king calls his wife and bride, and Ronixa his mistress. She retorts, "Bah, you should call me your slave." "My pious woman," he says. "You'll see me pious. Here's an example of a pious woman." And she kills herself. Vortigern's reaction to this sad act of torment is one of cruelty, of total detachment to the mother of his 3 sons, and is even insulting, comparing her in no indirect terms to a beast. The fact that the wife commits suicide, one of the most frowned upon sins of the Catholic religion, also is a sign that although symbolically she's meant to represent Henry VIII's first wife, the analogy is totally superficial and simply acts as a means to raise the didactic topic of the king's great matter. By sending the wife to hell, a place Catherine of Aragon would not be in, the dramatist effectively stops us identifying the wife's character with the Spanish monarch, who is above the negative, sinful portrayal of the women in this play. Indeed, we become convinced of this when the story continues and the portrayal of Ronixa makes it evident. In Act 3, when Vortigern's eldest son Vortimer conspires to overthrow his father, causing the king to escape his enemy's clutches and making Ronixa complain, "The rascal Vortigern has abandoned me to his enemy," his new pagan wife pays a henchman with gold to poison Vortigern's son. Having paid him, she muses, "My mind triumphs. It is eager. I, Ronixa, can scarcely control myself. For what else could I do? For what is a woman born if not to wreak havoc? In every age and every place we have been a criminal sex, full of evils. Our firstborn Eve has instructed every woman in her wiles. I do not have far to look in able to find examples of impious crime. What about Vortigern's wife? She showed me the way. Our characteristic is to be daring. Crime suits a woman. And what are men if not prey for ourselves?" And indeed, it does seem that Vortigern's wife has showed her the way, as when Vortimer dies and his ghost goads her in Act 4, she too commits suicide, admitting, "I have lived in guilt and I shall die guilty." Vortigern finally gets his comeuppance when Constance's brothers return from their self-imposed exile in Lesser Brittany, and we see the king alone in his burning palace, where, surrounded by flames, he is visited by all the vengeful ghosts of those whose death he was the cause of, together with the allegorical figure of death. They all condemn him to despair and die. Vodinus's ghost reminds him that he warned him with a word of salvation, but now as an avenger of your evil doing, I will make this final pronouncement: despair and die. The women are no less forgiving. The wife reminds Vortigern, "You polluted our marriage bed by bringing in a foreign whore, and you armed my hands for suicide with an avenging knife. So recognize your bride, despair and die." These words are commented on by Death, who continues the theme of women being naturally evil with the words, "An offended wife is an evil either to herself or to her husband. First she sowed her own doom, and now her husband's." Ronixa is also succinct in her opinion of Vortimer. "When you were burning with foul love and deadly lust, you wed me in an unclean marriage. Sinfully protecting this for your sake, I delivered your son, an innocent young man, to a treacherous death. Then, sought out by this same vengeful boy for a similar death, I atoned for my crime. For these things I am indebted to you, so despair and die." The all-accusing voice of Death comments, of course, on this by stating, "The fires of love and lust are always ruinous. Likewise, the hand of a sweet whore is faithful." Revenge is exacted on Vortigern, and he dies and goes to hell. And in the epilogue, we hear the didactic voice of Death warning, "Whoever gains no wisdom from these events, tomorrow it will be your fate that is thundered forth." Yet what wisdom do we gain from all this? Although this is still a work in progress, we could conclude that this Jesuit play, performed in the Catholic University on Spanish territory, presents the king's great matter framed within a history play of a tyrannical king who condones the martyrdom of his bishop and condemns Anne Boleyn's evil wiles in particular and women's evil wiles in general. Boleyn, apart from being alluded to as a shameless, lusty whore, is also represented as a pagan, this being the most vehement insult to the rival religion of the Catholics. The character analogous to Bishop John Fisher of Odinus is a staunch defender of his nation and his religion. Catherine of Aragon is alluded to and is not, perhaps her position as a Spanish Catholic monarch being above her condition of a woman. Here we are only missing Thomas More. Jesuit theatre throughout Europe touched on this theme on many other occasions, and doing so in the lingua franca of the continent, Latin, could only have caused a very large impact on its audiences. Thank you.